went to high school with a guy that, man, he had a thing. Both of us were kind of hopeless romantics, and he had a crush. I was a freshman. We were freshmen. He had a crush on this girl, and it's Valentine's Day, and neither one of us got any guts to say anything to anybody that we like or hope for. And so he's really got a thing for this girl named Carla, and he bought her on Valentine's Day. I think it was like 24 roses and this stuffed animal. He spent like $70 on Valentine's Day, left it on her desk in a room with like a note. And she never said a word to him. Being rejected is not fun. So let's talk about that. I'm Zach. This is The Average Christian, a project most of you are familiar with that we're trying to make Christianity livable and practical. That's all this is about. How do we define, understand, and live out this relationship with God? So we're looking at truth. We're also looking at dispelling myths. We're also diving into now Christian accountability, because if anybody's got to be accountable, it's us. There's more expected of us. So mainly geared toward Christians. Hopefully those of you who haven't obeyed Christ are watching this and learning as well. And if you're on podcasts, Apple, iTunes, or whatever, listening to us, we appreciate it. We're asking you to subscribe, to rate and review. That helps us out. It gets the word out about this podcast. If you are watching on YouTube, welcome. And if you haven't, subscribe already. And then hit the like button if this video helps you. Share this with other people. Comment. We're starting to get a lot more feedback and ideas from people. That's what this lesson is today. When God says no, it's from Tracy and Drew, who had quite a long response. And there's multiple lessons that are going to go into answering them. And I may read that later on, but this starts to answer some of their questions about how do you know when to move on from something, how long to pray over something, that sort of thing. And so talking about God saying no and rejection, nobody likes to be rejected, and God hears every prayer. Now, he only responds to those who are faithful to him. That's one of the blessings and benefits of being a child of God. If you're obedient to him, he's going to respond, or he responds to those who are searching as well, like Cornelius in Acts 10. So he responds to all of them, but he doesn't always say yes. Sometimes it's no. All right, we got to go back to the Old Testament in 2 Samuel chapter 12 and see David. Now, when I bring up David, King David, most people think of Bathsheba to begin with. All the great things this man did, a man after God's own heart, and all that God did for him. And usually the first thing is either Goliath or Bathsheba. Well, he's already committed this sin. He has stuck around when his army's off to war, seen Bathsheba, slept with her. She's pregnant, so he's got to bring in her husband Uriah and try to make it work where he can go home and sleep with Bathsheba, and then maybe things will work out and it'll look like his kid. Well, he's got too much honor for that, so when he comes home, he refuses to go in and lay with his wife because he remembers his fellow soldiers off in battle, and he just won't do it. So David tries again. It still doesn't work. So then he sends him back to war and puts him on the front lines, because if we can get this husband out of the way, then David can have Bathsheba for himself. So he does that, in a sense, murdering him, sending him off to die, to certain death at the front lines. And now Nathan the prophet's got to come and tell David that we know what you did. And he comes to him and tells him a story about this rich man who had all kind of flocks and all kind of herds, and this poor man who had one little lamb, and he treated the lamb like it was one of his children, and used to feed the lamb off of his own plate. He's so poor, that's all he's got, and it's him and his children and this little lamb. And the rich man's going to entertain some guests, and Nathan's telling David this story. The rich man's going to entertain some guests, but he doesn't want to use one of his, so he takes the only lamb that the poor man has and slaughters it and serves it to his guests. And David gets beside himself angry and said, look, this guy has got to pay. And Nathan basically said, David, you're the guy. You're the man. You're the rich man in that story. Look what all God has done for you. And you took from Uriah and then had him murdered. And so you've sinned against God in secret. Now you're going to be dealt with in public. One of the consequences of this sin is that this child that's born to Bathsheba and David, who Bathsheba goes on to be his wife, but this child is born is not going to make it, is going to die. And so you see here in verse 15 of 2 Samuel 12, Nathan went to his house, and the Lord afflicted the child that Uriah's wife bore to David, and he became sick. David therefore sought God on behalf of the child, and David fasted and went in and lay all night on the ground. Now, it looks like one night here. I'm not quite sure about this. I don't know if the child was 7 days old. I'll get into that in just a minute. But whatever the case, David just lays flat on the ground. I don't know if you've ever prayed like that or not, where you are so distraught. Now, he's got this baby that he cares about. That's his child now. He knows what God has told him already, what Nathan has told him, that God's going to do to this child as a consequence. Now he's laying all night on the ground. The elders of his house stood beside him to raise him from the ground, but he would not. So he's not going to get up. They're trying to pick him up. They're trying to console him. He won't move. He's acting sort of like a crazy man. He's just praying and fasting, not eating all night. So they go to raise him from the ground, but he won't. And he wouldn't eat food with them either. So on the seventh day, now that's where I don't know. Did David do this for 7 days? Whatever the case, he is distraught enough that it worries the elders of the house. It concerns these people who know him. Or maybe it was just the one night, and it's the seventh day that the child has been alive. On the seventh day, the child died. The servants of David were afraid to tell him that the child was dead, for they said, "Behold, while the child was yet alive, we spoke to him, and he didn't listen to us. How then can we say to him, the child is dead? He may do himself some harm." Now, look, you got to stop for a minute and take a look at this and see that David is, how much he cares, how much he's concerned, how hard he is praying. You've done this. I have too. I don't know if I've laid on the ground and fasted all night and prayed all night. I don't even like to use this example, but I will because it makes me highly uncomfortable. When I was in 8th grade, I believe it was, I ran out and stayed gone overnight. And when you tell it later on, it's kind of funny in parts. But me and a buddy decided we were going to make our parents pay or whatever. We didn't feel like we were appreciated. So we stayed gone all night. And there's a big, long story. Maybe I'll tell you some other time. So you can imagine what my parents went through. This is a Sunday night. Dad's a preacher. We go to church on Sunday night. I wasn't there for church, wasn't there afterwards. We stayed local, but we went across town in Virginia where we lived. And Mom talked about Dad sitting in the van that night just crying and praying all night because he has no idea where his son is. Now here David knows what's going to happen to his child, and he's still begging God. You got to imagine. Some of you have prayed for somebody dying in your family of cancer or dying of whatever. Some of you have prayed like that. I don't know what that's like, but you can understand here how hard David is praying. And you might be tempted to ask, how could God say no? Now, the answers are there, and that's not really a part of this, but he does say no, and the child dies. The part of the story to get to is, how do I respond? How did David respond to this? So he's so distraught and so torn up that the elders of the house don't even want to go to him and talk to him because, look, he's this bad while the kid's alive. How bad is he going to be? Like, he may hurt himself. He may kill himself. He may do something drastic once we tell him he's dead. So they're scared to death to talk to him. And he says here in verse 19, "But when David saw that his servants were whispering together, David understood that the child was dead. David said to his servants, 'Is the child dead?' And they said, 'He is dead.' Then David arose from the earth, washed and anointed himself, changed his clothes, went into the house of the Lord and worshiped. He then went to his own house. When he asked, they set food before him, and he ate. Then his servants said to him, 'What is this thing you've done? You fasted and wept for the child while he was alive, but when the child died, you arose and ate food.' He said, 'While the child was still alive, I fasted and wept, for I said, who knows whether the Lord will be gracious to me that the child may live. But now he's dead. Why should I fast? Can I bring him back again? I shall go to him, but he will not return to me.'" That's a lot to take in, but I want you to notice the reaction. As soon as he found out that the answer from God is no, on something so important, not some trivial, maybe a job or some other little thing. This is a child, life and death, literally. He finds out that God has said no, and he gets up and cleans up, gets himself together. First thing he does is go to worship God. He didn't blame God. He didn't wonder why. I'm sure he did maybe wonder why. I don't know what was in his head, but he went and praised God. He didn't blame. He didn't shout out at God. He didn't cry out at God. He went and praised God. You know why? Because he knew about responsibility. He knew why the answer was no. And he tried his best, and God said no. So the first thing he does, he goes and worships. The second thing he does, he goes and eats. And the elders are freaked out. Like, what in the world is this? The kid's alive. You should have been there with the kid. Perhaps you should have been celebrating what time you had your fasting and praying. Now he died. It looked like you're grieving beforehand. Now that he's gone, you're not grieving in the same way. It didn't make any sense. And David explains, look, I prayed. I asked. I thought maybe the Lord would be gracious. Maybe he would change his mind. God's changed his mind before. Go back and read about Abraham. Go back and read about Moses. But he didn't. And he said, look, there ain't anything I can do about it. So I'll see the child again, meaning I'll live the way I need to live. I'll get to, because that child will be in heaven, but he's not coming back. Now he goes on to comfort his wife. Look at the next few verses here in verse 24. Then David comforted his wife Bathsheba and went into her and lay with her, and she bore a son and called his name Solomon. And the Lord loved him. Sent a message by Nathan the prophet, so he called his name Jedediah because of the Lord. So he goes, he takes care of worshiping God. He gets himself together. Then he starts taking care of his responsibilities outside of God. He goes to his wife first and comforts her, and then gives her a legitimate child this time. And then he goes back to being king, and you watch the conquest that he goes back to. He goes back to his responsibilities, which is where he should have been in the first place. But he doesn't blame God. He worships God. He praises God. He accepts that the answer is no. And one of the questions for you and me is, can you accept that? Can you accept when God doesn't give you what you want? When life doesn't go the way you think it should? Can you accept that there's a bigger reason, a bigger picture behind it, even if you don't understand it? David seemed to have a good grasp. Sometimes we struggle with it. So I ask you the question again. Whatever it is you're praying for and asking for, what if God says no? Then what? And I challenge you to go back and look at David again.